Okay. Welcome to Greatest Scene Ever, Smorgasbord edition. I'm Professor Greg Smith, along with co-host Professor Kylos Brannon, and we are joined by the original co-host of Greatest Scene Ever, Dr. Paul Ohlers, right here.
GSE Classic.
GSE Classic, right. You may remember him from previous episodes. We're
Such
just
as.
like an elf for Christmas edition some
I feel
years
like this
ago.
is like Troy McClure in The
Yeah,
Simpsons.
it's true.
You
You may
know him.
remember me from such films as. We're still getting mail about the elf thing by the way, as we go through.
Right.
Paul is, in fact, a doctor. He's licensed to discuss audio, film, and to perform motel room surgery. We've also asked Paul back to join us for the special edition of the program to tell us his choices for Desert Island Collection, his 3 greatest scenes ever. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Your 3 greatest movies ever? That's what I asked you for.
Yeah. Well,
What'd you come up with?
Actually, I sort of broke the rules.
Okay, good.
And I
like breaking
figured
rules.
instead of talking about my 3 greatest movies ever, I would talk about movies in different ways. So the first group I wanted to talk about were
So 3
movies
groups
that,
of 3 is what
3
you
groups
did.
of 3.
Okay.
So the first one I wanted to talk about were movies that I grew up with as a child that sort of became part of the lexicon of American society.
Okay.
And that
Well, you're really old. It's like Citizen Kane,
yeah.
Wizard of Oz.
But I mean, movies that like everyone saw and everyone sees still and quote, and that sort of becomes a fabric of who you are.
Right.
So for me, the first movie that really became part of the culture and growing up was Star Wars. And I remember when Star Wars came out, I was very young, but that was out. This is the old days of movies where movies would come out and they'd be out for like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I remember driving by the mall every day, and it was a good 5-6 months till my parents were like, well, we'll go see it first.
Right.
Because it was PG.
Right.
And like PG meant like your parents had to go see it. It wasn't like now where it's like
Couldn't go alone.
PG-13 maybe, or R like means you don't let your
You don't go
6-year-old
until you're
or whatever go.
45.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah.
It was like a different era. So, but I remember Star Wars was out forever.
Yeah.
And then I remember that Christmas I got like my first action figure. And that
You
was
still
like a
have
big
that
thing.
action figure?
I do have that first action.
Do you really?
Yeah, my Luke Skywalker action figure.
Oh, that's outstanding. I love that.
So yeah, I mean, but that's like that was a huge part of growing up then, because that was the first movie that was sort of commercialized, and it became they would sell toys and everything.
Very much so.
It's a great choice, especially being of certain ages. I'm a little bit younger than you, but I do have to say I have it on good standing that it's the first film I was actually present in the film theater for.
Yeah.
I was 2 years old when it was re-released.
Is that right?
And my parents made it a point to bring me because they decided that they recognized something about that film and wanted me to be able to say I was there.
Yeah, well, I
Even
mean,
though I don't remember it.
and I remember sort of the great TV moments, like it premiered on ABC. I remember that was a big moment.
That was a
It
big
came on
moment. That was years later.
And then I remember the low light, which was,
Yeah.
I shouldn't mention this, but the holiday special. I'm sure George Lucas would like that.
That was pretty bad.
I remember that. I
But
remember
something to
watching it.
remember
But at least
about
B. Arthur
that
was in it.
film and a lot of these other films that you're talking about was that it didn't, you didn't buy the Blu-ray and DVD 6 weeks or 6 months after the release. We waited forever for this to come out on VHS tape, and that was huge. It was a long period. And so merchandising was very different. Anyway,
And we talked about all the iconic. I mean, we didn't
Yes.
talk about the scenes, but there's so many iconic scenes. Him going down the trench, and
Yes.
the Force is strong with this one, and all that kind of stuff that became really part of society.
Yeah, it really did. It became emblematic of, in both, its discourse and how we dealt with stuff. The defense program that Reagan championed, which was nicknamed Star Wars. So anyway, so that's film number 1. Film number 2.
Film number 2 is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
Which also, was sort of a Lucas and tied with Spielberg, but
Right.
Lucas really understood how to make, especially in that era, how to make these films that sort of became iconic, and really sort of, the film to me was an homage to sort of earlier films with the MacGuffin. We sort of talked a bit about that. You talked about a bit, with Hitchcock and sort of the suspense.
Yeah.
And sort of how the story unfolds, where there's like this mystery and you're trying to figure out what's going on. To have that sort of element that's driving the plot, the thing that I didn't really like as a kid was there were no action figures,
Oh,
for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
True.
So there weren't really a whole bunch of,
True.
and I think that was
Yeah.
like, again, like that was right in that era.
Yeah.
But you know, it was, and also I remember the faces melting at the end.
Yeah.
As a kid, it was very traumatic.
Yeah, no action figures, but I do remember a lot of Halloween costumes.
But yeah.
I had the Atari game.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had the Raiders Atari game,
Yeah.
which was, graphics wise, it was basically just a block with a hat
Yeah, yeah.
drawn on it.
Right.
Did you have the ET one? That's the other.
Oh, that's another really bad looking one. Yeah, yeah, that was great. You pick up the
The Reese's Pieces.
Reese's Pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. Dating ourselves here. Okay, so that's film number 2, Raiders, and 3?
3 for me was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which was an older film, way before I was a teenager. But I think, and seeing my niece go through this, who's a young teenager, that's sort of a rite of passage that all sort of young teens discover that movie. And there's so many quotable moments in that where, instead of retreating, they say run away,
Run away,
and,
run
and with the
away.
coconuts.
Yeah.
And the death awaits with nasty pointy teeth,
Yeah.
and it's the rabbit.
Yeah.
The
That rabbit's dynamite.
We're back to rabbits.
We are French.
yeah, back to rabbits. Yeah.
yeah.
The holy hand grenade of Antioch, and
that's
like
right.
there's parts you can probably quote.
Sure.
You sort of get to that point where you can quote the entire scene.
Yeah.
Um,
It's just a flesh wound, like when he fights with the knight and stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a whole Monty Python it sort of hit right at the right moment where we needed a laugh as a society, and it really jumped very easily from the TV show to the screen.
Yeah.
And Holy Grail, I believe, was the first of the Monty Python films, if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
I think so.
Yeah. As I
and
remember.
the other thing too that it did really well was some of the other movies sort of incorporated sketches.
Yeah.
So like The Meaning of Life and things like
Yeah.
that were just like a series of sketches.
Yeah.
And the Holy Grail was a complete movie on
It
its
did,
own.
and told a journey.
Yeah, and it also had some really great authentic period music.
Yeah.
Which made it sort of believable in that time period.
Yeah. And we've talked about this. You and I talked about this earlier, and you and I have talked about this as well on this program. About, especially, I'm thinking back to the episode we did about the American comedy, and we talk about different ways of being funny on film. And I always think of Monty Python as kind of an homage to the Marx Brothers. Just silly things happening.
Yeah.
Not just ridiculous, but things that couldn't happen, and just silly. Bring up the holy hand grenade of Antioch. And blow. They're expecting a dragon in the cave, as you said, but it's a rabbit. But he's dynamite, and he rips the throat out, and blah blah. Just the silliness of it. And again, we were talking in an earlier series episode about committing to a part,
Right.
and why something works if you really commit to it as an actor. And here's Monty Python, unabashedly, unapologetically silly. In fact, John Cleese, one of his sketches was the Silly Walk sketch, where he
Right.
did silly walks and outrageous voices. And all of those characters sort of inhabit the Python crew, plus the great animation.
And all the things you were talking about before, like there's sort of a little bit of everything. So the young guy who's going to get married, he just wants to sing, and the father who hates
Yes.
musicals.
Every
Kind
time
of
he
referencing
turns to
the
the
musicals
window,
before.
yeah.
So I mean, that's to me that's the appeal of that movie. It's just even if it's funny. I watched it with somebody who didn't like the movie, and he was 2 days later was quoting the movie.
Yeah,
So
it's a great movie. Well, that's your first 3. So we've got Star Wars,
Star Wars,
Raiders.
Raiders, Lost Ark, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Monty
And
Python
I
and
would
Holy
say
Grail.
the next 3 things
You
I
can't say the
considered-
next 3 things.
Okay, because we're going to go to a next segment.
Indeed.
Okay.
How'd you know? That's all the time we have for this episode. We're going to come back in the next episode, and I want to hear your next 3 films, okay?
Okay. Great.
But for now, I'm Greg, he's Kylos, he's Paul, and this is Greatest Scene Ever.